Today, we have Ian and Mercy and Adrita and Abdel, and they are doing the CMHC project. And the project is this. You all know that we have a bit of a problem with the ability to build houses quickly. So this is, what can the federal government do to incentivize productivity enhancing innovations in Canada's residential construction sector so that we can build more units of market housing each year? So this is building more housing by improving the efficiency of construction methods. So the four of you, come on up and take it away. All the rules from yesterday apply. All the rules from yesterday apply. When the beeper goes, you've got 1 minute. So far, you guys are doing very well for timing.
With a show of hands, how many of us here own a house in Canada? We see quite a number of hands. And how many of us are renting? Quite a number of hands. With that, we welcome you to our presentation today with Building Innovation, Offsite Construction in Canada. What does a home mean? A home is a place we come to at the end of a very hard day at work. It's also a place we come to after a long day of judging presentations. A home is our safe haven, a comfort zone, and this is something that's missing in the lives of many Canadians today. Like we said, this is our team, and we are here to talk to you about how productivity enhancing innovations can help more houses being built in Canada right now. We have our team here. We have Ian, Mercy, Abdul, and myself. And with that, we are here on a journey to hear about the recommendations from this team as to how Canada can make building homes a reality. With that being said, what is the problem that we're facing right now? As we know, many Canadians are struggling to find a place to call their home. And one of the biggest reasons is that there are so many barriers to building homes right now that we are facing. We have what we call a housing crisis, a major deficit in the housing sector. The supply cannot keep up with the existing demand, and as a result, this has led to shortages of households in all types of houses. What we see is a chronic undersupply of market housing that is driving up the prices of available homes for sale and for rent. This is causing the financial stress that we see among many Canadians today, and it is affecting all of our well-being. Why the situation is like this? Well, we will come back to our reasons in a bit. But what the federal government has done is the federal government has set up an ambitious goal of setting 3.87 million homes that needs to be built by 2031. What does this huge number mean? To the existing completion rates of 230,000 houses being built right now, we need another additional 500,000 houses. As a result, with this ambitious goal, we need something ambitious, and we need industrialization in the housing sector that has been lacking productivity for the last few decades. What we have identified through intensive literature review and consulting over 30 stakeholders is that there are 5 key barriers that exist, which is preventing the current house building that we want to be in place. What are these? Number 1, we have stringent laws that limit new development. We have these chronic and increasing labor shortages in place. Imagine this. With aging population in the construction sector, most of our construction workers are going to retire next year, or even in the years that are coming in front of us. And new young workers are not willing to take up that skill. According to a blue collar report back in 2023, 79% of high school graduates said they would rather go for a traditional route in academia and go for traditional careers rather than being invested in trade schools. And that number is huge. What we also see is like the housing sector is very slow to respond to innovations. We have seen many productivity enhancing mechanisms in different sectors all across Canada, whether it's manufacturing, whether it's agriculture, whether it's wholesale and retail. However, the housing sector has not quite caught up with what it should have been. What we also see is that there is also really high prices. Imagine this, back in 2013, a one-bedroom apartment in Canada was rented for around $800. The same one-bedroom apartment right now is over $2,000 as rent. The increment has been huge. And this, as you can see on the slide, is not only the rent prices that have hiked, it's also the cost of owning a home that has increased immensely. To make matters worse, it's also more costly to build houses because construction materials have increased immensely. With that being said, we have our question given to us by our sponsor, CMHC. The question is, what can the federal government do to incentivize productivity-enhancing innovations in Canada's residential construction sector to build more units of market housing each year? We agree it is a mouthful question, but it's very fitting for a problem that is equally complex. With that, we move on to Ian. Thank you.
Thanks, Adrita. So as Adrita said, we're facing a huge problem, and the gap is large and growing. Adrita mentioned the ambitious target the federal government has spent of building 3.87 million homes over the next 8 years. And that works out to just under 500,000 homes a year. The trouble is, this year we're on track to build about 230,000 homes. Last year we built about 230,000 homes. The year before that we built about 230,000 homes. So it's fair to say that the construction methods that have contributed to that gap are not going to be the construction methods that get us out of the situation that we're in. What we do need is a foundational shift in industrial policy and the way that homes are built in this country. Traditional stick build involves building a home on site piece by piece. It's labor intensive, it's time intensive, and it's increasingly more expensive because interest rates and material costs are rising. So it was wholly appropriate for CMHC to ask specifically about productivity enhancing innovation. But this in and of itself is really broad, and so we were encouraged by CMHC to scope our question down. So how did we go about doing that? Well, we looked at a number of productivity-enhancing innovations and methods. We looked at 3D printing, we looked at adaptive reuse, we looked at advanced building technologies, and we also looked at off-site construction. We scored those against 6 different domains: productivity enhancement, labor enhancement, cost, scalability, which refers to the process, how quickly a process can be expanded or adjusted to various levels of demand or project size. We looked at market suitability, which was a really important question to see how appropriate these interventions might be, not only in the Canadian market, but also in the Canadian environment. And these include things like weather, the labor market, local building codes, materials availability, enabling infrastructure, as well as buyer preferences. So with the goal in mind of more houses faster, we scored each of these accordingly. 3D printing is really innovative. It has revolutionized manufacturing sectors, particularly with products such as plastics. For home construction, it involves layer by layer construction of concrete using large printers. These printers are good for exteriors, but they're not particularly useful in an infill situation because of their size, and they're less effective at building interiors than they are at exteriors. Additionally, and it may be difficult to swing a hammer in Canada in the winter, but concrete doesn't flow outdoors in February either. So there are some shortfalls there. We looked at adaptive reuse, which is repurposing an existing structure for a new purpose, basically converting an office tower into an apartment building. This has advantages. It utilizes existing municipal infrastructure, ties into transit hubs, water, wastewater facilities, and occurs in attractive locations like urban centers. However, this can be really expensive, and there's a limit to the number of building stocks that are available or appropriate for this use. Advanced building technologies. These are the really cool, futuristic developments that are driving increases in productivity. Things like smart bricks, which regulate heat and cooling, smart glass, which regulates light, mass timber, and self-healing concrete. Really, really interesting things. Although these really represent shifts in building products and not in building process. And so that's why we zeroed in on off-site construction. Off-site construction is the manufacturing of building components in a controlled factory setting and then transporting them to site for installation. Off-site construction uses assembly line technologies and automated machines. It can be two-dimensional or three-dimensional, and this will become important a little later. There is a distinction between portable modular, which is intended to be moved more than once, and permanent modular, which is manufactured once and tied to the land. And that's a distinction that we would like lenders to understand better. And again, we'll talk more about that later. Off-site construction does meet the moment. It scores well on productivity, on labor. There are high labor costs for startup, but these are offset over time as efficiencies of scale are realized over time. Building quality is another question that we'll look at in just a moment. Factorization is highly scalable, and Canada has existing infrastructure, and there are about 45 firms in the sector currently in Canada, which demonstrates the viability. So overall, we're excited to endorse a full-throated approach to off-site construction. It, as I say, it meets the moment. Timelines fall. Weather delays disappear by moving indoors. It scales well on labor because of those assembly lines and machines. Moving work indoors is also safer. Injuries fall, which is important for workers, and it also means fewer days lost. And again, it's faster. Traditional build often has between 25 and 50% time overruns, whereas factorization, you see 20 to 50% reductions in project timelines. So we are looking for that fundamental shift in home building, which does require changes in both thinking and in behavior across the sector. That means all levels of policymakers in government. It means the construction industry and workers. It includes home buyers and other stakeholders. They've all got key roles to play in recognizing the potential of off-site construction and in realizing this shift. Bringing around that transition will require supportive policies and investment from government. Those include changes to the building code systems, financial incentives, as well as closing the labor gap. So for today, we want you to think about off-site construction as a process that results in a product known as a manufactured home. We want you to think a little differently, perhaps, about what's meant by modular construction. Container homes, tiny homes, temporary emergency shelter for displaced peoples. This is not what we're talking about when we're talking about the modern manufactured homes. I want you to keep in mind things like this. This is a 40-story tower in Singapore that is the largest apartment building to date that's been built using modular technology, and this demonstrates what's possible with scale. On the quality front, this is Antonio Banderas's £3 million luxury home in the English countryside, which isn't for everyone, but will demonstrate what is possible as far as quality and customization. So we hope you keep these in mind when we're thinking about what modern manufactured homes of today look like. As I say, we hope we've given you some things to think about as it relates to the advantages, efficiency and speed being chief among them, quality, which is a shift in thinking, environmental sustainability, we see less waste and less rework, and again, off-site construction and modular construction are entirely feasible in the Canadian context. We do need to acknowledge some of the limitations which were front of mind when we were developing our recommendations. There are those high initial costs of standing up a factory and front-loading expenses. Inter-provincial dependencies. Off-site construction has particular challenges within our federation, and what is built in one province may not be to code next door. It's fair to agree that the regulatory framework that we live with was designed for traditional construction build and is not well suited today for off-site construction. And finally, stigma and misconception, which I've alluded to a bit, and we'll talk about a bit more later. But these were the particular challenges with off-site construction that we had in mind when we leaned into looking at options recommendations, which Mercy will now kick us off with.
Thank you, Ian. The 2024 budget announced provided a buffet of initiatives by the federal government. It geared towards providing solutions to housing. Still, we identify 3 key issues that need to be addressed if these initiatives are to be successful, or if off-site construction is to have a wider adoption rate. The first is regulatory reforms and legislative reforms. The second is targeted demand side and supply side financial measures. The third one is addressing labor shortages as an underlying issue to address the construction or supply gap in Canada. This tripod solution we feel is necessary to get the shift that we need in the construction sector to achieve a wider adoption of off-site construction. So now we go to regulatory reforms and legislative reforms. Federal government should embark on legislative reforms, amending laws, and also streamlining processes. This will help to encourage the adoption of off-site construction as a productivity-enhancing innovation. Jurisdiction for housing currently is shared between the federal government and the provincial governments. And currently, a patchwork of federal, provincial, and municipal regulations actually control or impede adoption of off-site construction. What this looks like, let me paint a picture for you. We have the National Building Code developed by the federal government. Then the 10 provinces have taken this code, and only one province kept it as it is. That's Prince Edward Island. The remaining 9 provinces have put their own touch and flavor to it and changed it. And guess what? 3,700 municipalities that exist within Canada have the mandate also to touch up on this law. Guess what they did? Of course, they added their own flavor to it. So this has created inconsistencies in the system. Permitting processes have become complex, and at the same time, bottlenecks and inefficiencies exist within the system. No surprise there. Our stakeholders further substantiated that it takes 3 to 5 years to get permitting and approval processes in the GTA region. That's enough time to do a PhD. Furthermore, manufactured homes do not conform with modern current traditional construction norms. They are manufactured off-site rather than on-site. They are transitional in future in the sense that they start with being movable and then end up being immovable. They are also interprovincial in the sense that they can be made in 2 or more provinces, whether in whole or part, and then stacked up in a third province like a Lego piece. For example, let me tell you something about something called double inspection. A manufacturer in Windsor, Ontario, decides to manufacture homes for a client in Manitoba. He has to bring all the authorities having jurisdictions from Manitoba to Windsor for the first inspection, and then organize a second inspection on site. This may look easy. Then imagine if he has to do that for 10 municipalities. The per diems, the travel allowances, and everything that is involved. That's enough to kick somebody out of business. So, believing that we have set the tone for what the complexities that exist within off-site construction or manufacturing has to offer, let's make our first recommendation. We recommend a national building code for manufactured homes. We believe that this will ensure consistency and clarity in standards. It will accelerate project timelines. It will also reduce costs. It will streamline permitting and approval processes. It will reduce delays. It would incentivize innovation in the construction sector. It will improve quality and safety through standardization, and it will enhance the reputation of off-site manufacturing as a reliable way or reliable methodology. What we want is that this code should be applicable throughout Canadian provinces in the same way, and also in the municipalities. I'm sure the Canadians are looking at me and saying, how the hell would this work? So how? The next question is, how do we ensure uniformity of these standards? What do we need to do to ensure that all the provinces take it as it is? We don't have to do anything. Guess what? The Constitution has done that for us already. Section 91 of the Constitution, under the Trade and Commerce Power, gives exclusive legislation to the federal government to make laws or items of trade and commerce, meaning that the provinces should not touch any items that are traded interprovincially or internationally. Manufactured homes are a product, and they are traded interprovincially and internationally, and the federal government should legislate exclusively for it. Yes, we are not trying to touch upon the powers of the municipalities to make laws regarding land use. They can also continue to regulate for the use of land, as well as the concrete compositions for where those lands are being installed. It sounds weird, right? 2 regulations, 1 for the housing and 1 for the land. It's not weird. It's already been done in the United States. California specifically has taken it a step further to create 1 building code for manufactured homes, and then the municipalities now regulate for the concrete positions and for the houses where these things are being installed. Leads us to a second recommendation. We want the amendment of the National Housing Strategy Act. Why is the amendment of this law so important to us? National Housing Strategy Act sets a tone for housing policies all through Canada. The National Housing Council, as a member of established in the Act, allows for the purposes of furthering housing policies and the National Housing Strategy. This council composed of people that advise the Federal Minister of Housing on housing issues in Canada. However, the current council does not have provincial ministers of housing in it. It's a national housing strategy without provincial housing ministers. Okay. We believe that the Prime Minister should be included as part of this part of this council, and that we believe that they can give critical insights and feedback on local housing issues. We believe that this will lead to greater or joint ownership of the national housing strategy, and also it will drive engagement and collaboration across the provinces on housing issues. We want them to be part of it because it will drive engagement. It will allow for networking, for the provinces to be able to leverage the networks they have to be able to solve the problem that exists within the housing realm. So now the problem comes again. Federalism. How do we make the provinces a part of this council? What will make them say, okay, I don't want to be about? Why wouldn't they opt out? The federal government announced a buffet of initiatives this 2024. That's how I started my presentation. Why not tie this buffet of initiatives to membership on the council? Because yes, if you're a member of the council and you're able to discuss housing issues, it will lead to proper coordination, efficient allocation of resources to avoid duplication at the federal and provincial level. And you also allow the effective resolution of housing challenges. So, if the federal government makes eligibility for the funding or the loan or the loans that they are making available to the provinces as being part of the council, we believe that this will help us to solve the housing issue or go a long way in supporting that. Let me tell you a story of a place called Levittown. It's not an imaginary place. It exists in Long Island. I'm not making it up. You can Google this after the presentation. Abraham Levitt and sons, notable among them William, decided to solve the housing supply gap in the US. Does that sound familiar? Housing supply gap. So they borrowed the Henry Ford assembly line process and created a 27-step process of construction. So what they were doing were manufacturing homes. With 36 men, they were bringing out 18 houses a day. One day, 18 houses. That's ridiculous. At the end of year one, they were bringing out 30 houses a day. So now, it's a no-brainer. It's a successful venture. Yes, it's successful. It went on to be done in Pennsylvania, in Virginia, in Puerto Rico, in France, and even in the UK. So now the question becomes, what happened to Levittown as a project? I will tell you, it's the same thing high-tech, high capital, and huge employee-based company are suffering from today. They cannot replicate what was done in 1947, 8 decades ago. What is stopping them now that we have better technologies to do that? Let me tell you. The success of Levittown was short-lived because they were slapped with 2,500 building code violations. Yes. In 122 homes. That's enough to declare bankruptcy for anybody. Eventually, it led to bankruptcy of the project. It led to labor issues with the labor union. And Levittown went out of business. So I love laws. I love regulations. I'm a lawyer. So of course I love laws. We make money from the existence of laws. Still, we have to balance good innovations and regulation to ensure that we are not stifling or strangling, good innovations and technology. Thank you very much. Adrida, thank you.
We have heard from the lawyer and the team. It's time for the economist to speak. Ladies and gentlemen, what we have seen for offsite construction firms is that they have a very high initial cost of investment, and they have to make all the components in advance before the building has been made. As a result, the cost of production is pretty steep. What they have to do is they have to have high overhead costs. They have to have, like I said, components made well in advance. In fact, these industries are often not suited to respond to the booms and busts of the market. What we have also seen is that stick-built houses, on the other hand, the traditional way in which houses are made, they receive constant streams of finances from financial instruments or different financial institutions. However, these financial institutions are not available to provide that support to these offsite firms. Why? Because they're deemed riskier, and also because of the nature of not having the land as a collateral. Imagine this, like we have heard, when everything we need to build a house is made in the factories, where is the land? Without land, there is no collateral. Without no collateral, there is no financing vehicles in place that works for traditional housing. As a result, the cost of production, like I have mentioned, is extremely high. In fact, the cost of running an offsite factory is 30% of the value of a completed building. In the last 20 years alone, Canadian offsite firms have declared bankruptcy, and the number has been increasing. We say we want technology, we say we want innovation in the housing sector. However, if we do not create the landscape to promote these innovations, it will not work out, and we will see more bankruptcy in the future. Thus, we recommend providing a working capital lines of credit. What this will do is it will stimulate the supply side, address these high initial costs of production, ensure that there is liquidity in place, and that these firms can pay back the loan that they have taken in 2 years' time. And this will be done at a commercial basis. The reason why we say 2 years' time is because on average, depending on the complexity of the project, the first offsite building takes around 2 to 4 months to completion. As a result, 2 years or 24 months gives them ample amount of time to make sure there is positive cash flow and that they can pay back the amount that they have taken from the bank. This is to bridge the gap between construction and sales. In a way, it's overcoming the valley of death, which we see among entrepreneurs or even, new businesses. What we want to talk to you about today is how this is not unique to offsite construction. Organizations such as the Development Bank of Canada, BDC, has done this before. BDC is a crown corporation that provides loans and financial services to businesses all throughout Canada, especially to small and medium businesses. BDC has done this before in terms of the aerospace industry, where it takes 5 to 7 years to complete building an aircraft. Before these aircrafts are being built, there are all of these suppliers who are providing the individual components that are required to build these aircrafts. To give you just an example, an regional jet has around 70,000 individual components that engineers know of. There might be more, but that is what engineers say that they know of. And these components need to be built in advance, bought in advance, made together, put together, like our teammates have said, in Lego pieces, and then we have the aircraft in place. The same is also true for offsite construction. However, it is not taking 5 to 7 years. Since BDC has precedence in providing financial help to the airspace industry, we believe the same can be done also for offsite. The time has come to invest in the future of housing construction, and the time has come to have revolutionary modern methods of construction, and the time is now. So that the next time we come here in a room like this and we ask how many of us are owning homes in Canada, we have more hands raised. Over to you, Ian.
Thanks, Adrita. We also want to see the federal government supports some targeted demand-side mechanisms, and there are two that I'll draw attention to this morning. The first is to adjust existing federal home programs to require off-site construction. Two quick examples. The Federal Lands for Homes Plan intends to unlock federal lands to build 250,000 homes. A very small amount of this is targeted to off-site construction. $4 million over 2 years will build off-site construction homes on 4 sites across the country. We think this should be vastly upscaled. Another good target is the apartment construction loan program. This is a $15 billion loan program to build 30,000 purpose-built apartments across the country, which are sorely needed. And we would like to see thresholds set to require off-site construction as part of this program. It's important to know that as a loan program, the government will recoup its investment, which is an important feature of the interventions that we've suggested. The other big idea that we're excited about is for the federal government to engage in targeted direct lending to buyers of off-site construction. As I mentioned earlier, one of the problems limiting uptake of off-site construction is that would-be buyers face higher borrowing costs because of rigidity and misunderstanding in the lending sector about the difference between portable modular and permanent modular, and related questions about the collateralization of land. The failure to distinguish between portable and permanent modular can cause homeowners to, would-be homeowners to seek out private loans at higher rates, which is another barrier, which is a barrier to adoption. And so if the federal government, we recommend that the federal government provide long-term loans at Government of Canada preferred rates on a commercial basis for a limited time to demonstrate the feasibility of lower cost loans. This will encourage adoption, reduce costs for homeowners, adjust for the information asymmetry in the market, and also build more homes quickly. As I say, this will have a variety of advantages, including demonstrate the feasibility of offsite, what it can do, and together will function as a demand pull to support the industry. With that, I'll throw it to Abdel, who will talk us through labor.
Thank you, Ian. I mean, we've talked about regulations, we've talked about finance, we've talked about demand side, we've talked about supply side. After 30 more stakeholders and so many people around, I invite you guys to just think, give me one product that doesn't need labor or someone to build it. And guess what? You won't find any. Hence why the labor market in the construction sector in Canada is currently standing on between 1.6 to 1.7 million construction workers. And guess what? Based on Billforce Canada, 700,000 of these workers within the next 4 years are going to retire. That will leave a 40% vacuum within the labor force. And based on the aging workforce, because they're getting retired, it falls to the second part, which is based on the RBC report, which we have stumbled upon. It takes more labor force worker in the past 20 years to build a house. And this is where it comes to falling productivity. And then the current immigration pointing system currently in Canada does not support having more labor force people to come in. Hence why we are proposing to revise the point system and modify the point system of the Canadian immigration under the federal skilled labor force. And we will actually increase the points for the work experience in the construction sector, and we will minimize the education language proficiency. And everyone is looking at me as if I'm crazy, but actually Canada just launched last month a pilot caregiver program, which they actually did the exact same thing. And we will replace this language proficiency, and we will replace it with and introduce a language safety test. Because we need to make sure that our labor force, they come here, they know how to navigate the complexities of a construction site, whether in English or in French. And third of all, the streamlined hiring process, create a consolidated pool of construction companies where they will gather around. And once the labor force person is actually flagged and passes on, these construction companies can go ahead and directly hire him. And we move on to our holy grail with the sector acknowledgement. Sector transition strategy is actually the holy grail as Tick built shift, and they actually said, and I quote, "There are currently many challenges that will make it impossible to reach these targets without substantial systemic change to how we finance and build homes in this country." It's not me, it's actually the people that build things. And I go to global case studies where we found 3 continents, 4 different countries. One of them is the US, which my colleague Mercy touched upon. The second one, who doesn't like the Nordics? Actually, Sweden represents 40% of its housing sector as modular. And third of all, Qatar, and probably a lot of people like soccer. Qatar, for 2022 World Cup, actually revamped its whole immigration point system just to have more labor force workers to prepare for the FIFA World Cup. Last but not least, the beast. China is a beast on its own. It actually represents the biggest construction market in the world of $13 trillion, and actually 20% of it if it's modular. And they can actually house 1.6 billion people. And I would like to say, you see 14 members, we have a 5th one. This is Mercy's daughter. She's been always for emotional support. And thank you very much for attending this presentation.
While we're giving thank yous, we would also like to thank our sponsor, CMHC, specifically Will and Sandra, for guiding us, and also to our 60 member, Neil right there. Thank you for being an amazing coach, and thank you for all the support.
Thank you, team. Great job. Okay, over to the judges to kick things off. Who would like to start?
It's Brenda. Great, thanks. I'm going to come back to the national building code that you're proposing, of course, because we always love this interprovincial stuff, everybody on the panel. But I guess, to the best of my knowledge, the national building, well, I'm sure this is the case, the national building code is kind of a minimum standard. And when other people adopt something else, it's part of meet and greet. So they're always increasing things above the national standard. So by definition, to date, if we adopt the national standard, it's kind of a step back in lots of respects. So that's not to say that, you know, there can't be a national standard that moves above, but culturally and organizationally, we're not there. And I fear that it might take an awful lot to get us there, to say nothing of all the usual federal provincial issues. So I wondered if you had considered something more along the lines of ISO standards, like international standards. And your example, I can see you did, because your example around aerospace, for example, all of these components are produced somewhere else. It's not government mandating all of these things. They must meet quality standards that then just must be assembled. Yeah. That strikes me as an alternative that might be, difficult as it sounds, actually easier. And could you tell us about your thoughts on that?
Yeah, thank you very much for stating that. Our coach warned us that this is likely the first question we're going to get, so he was spot on. So yes, we did consider standards. Yeah, there's actually two key standards that are leading when it comes to manufactured homes. There is Canadian Standard Association, CSA standards for manufactured homes. There's MBI ICC standard as well. They are currently regulating the industry since there's no formal regulation by the Canadian government for that industry. Yes, I really agree with you when you say that the federal government creates a model and then the provinces can adopt it and change it as it will. During our discussions with stakeholders, we found out that this adoption, which is, of course, as you said, a cultural thing, has created more problems than providing solutions. So what we try to do is to say, okay, those standards exist. The National Building Code for Manufactured Home, you can see that we didn't actually stipulate the contents of that code. Within our report, we stated that the CSA standard and ICC should be looked at by the federal government when putting together this model code that we are proposing. And we singled out the manufactured homes as a product. We didn't look at it from the sense of trying to regulate the housing sector because we knew it would be problematic, just as you have said. If we come from the angle that the federal government is regulating a product under Section 91, Trade and Commerce Power, which actually the Schedule 6 went on to say that items of natural things that come from natural resources, the provincial government can regulate for it. But if it has been transformed, which manufacturers' homes have been transformed, if it has been transformed, then only the federal government can regulate for it. So we are looking at it not as an industry per se, we are looking at it as a product because it allows us to streamline those back and forth that usually happens when anything is created like that relates to law. So we are hoping that looking at it that way will allow us achieve our goal of streamlining processes. I don't know if I answered your question.
I thought that was a really interesting presentation, and I guess I wanted to ask a little bit more on the financing side, and just to understand a bit better what the pain points are. I mean, I was sort of thinking, I mean, you were first of all focusing on the lack of financing for the manufacturers of the manufactured homes, but then sort of wondered, well, why can't they get financing just the way any other manufacturer does, the way the building material company does? And in fact, compared to orthodox home construction, because the production period's much shorter, then the financing needs are surely much smaller than for other types of homes. And I guess the other sort of related thing, both with regard to the financing of the manufactured homes, but also with regard to the financing for the homeowner. I sort of wondered if there are regulatory constraints. I mean, if the way that OSFI, for example, regulates this form of lending does create any obstacles that have to be addressed, or whether it's largely the behavior of the lenders that you're looking to change.
Thank you, Mr. Lane, for the question. For the supply side, I'll be providing the answer, and for demand side, we'll ask Ian to provide the answer. So, like we have heard, a lot of the times, because these projects are deemed riskier, regular financial institutions are they're not very open towards providing these loans to these organizations, mostly because they want to see collateral. They want to see where is the land. They're afraid whenever they hear offsite or manufactured homes, banks or lending authorities are worried that these homes can be just taken away and they will lose the money and there's going to be higher rates of default. As a result, there are two things at play. One, they are not that willing to provide that financial support. And two, even if they are willing, they do not understand the offsite construction sector that well. As a result, because there is a mismatch between the knowledge and perception as to what an offsite construction methods or what an offsite building looks like, their confidence into the mechanism and the methods keep on decreasing. Even if we can give you a simple example, CMHC is a big promoter of innovations and a big promoter of technology. However, even CMHC had only backed one offsite construction financially. And it's not because CMHC does not want to, it's just that the current knowledge mechanism and the landscape does not allow for much of these translations. I mean, banks understand that they can take up these riskier projects. However, they are not that willing to, because if they can invest in something that is safer, they would want to go with that. With that, Ian, I can give it to you.
Thanks, Adrita. On the demand side, what we'd like to see is federal leadership for a short period of time to demonstrate the viability of providing loans to offsite construction firms. We think that is a function that's best done in the market, but because of information asymmetries and a lack of understanding. Our vision is that this would be a long-term loan program, but only have a 5-year intake, and then could be sunsetted, revised, or continued. But ideally, the markets would see and be perhaps a little less rigid and a little more innovative in their thinking, and find ways that they could offer mortgages to permanent modular homes.
Yeah, interesting presentation, so thank you for that. My question is more around your case studies. So great international case studies. The feasibility of your recommendations seems great. And I'm asking, I've seen some of this stuff happen in, I think it's Nova Scotia or New Brunswick, very big on modular homes, spending millions of dollars on skilled trades. And so I guess I'm wondering, the international cases are great, but do you have anything to say about what's happening in those provinces and the results that they're getting, and if it can be implemented across Canada?
Thank you so much. I was actually waiting for a question like this. Funny enough, we actually had the New Brunswick Research Lab for modular construction, which is actually under the University of New Brunswick. And actually, what they had in Nova Scotia, for example, one of the implementations to actually make more people to come into labor, because it's a huge segment, the construction sector, that they actually started having incentivized and tax rebates for labor construction workers. But actually, that was implemented last year, and it hasn't have a lot of demand on it. That's why it had failed. And according to the CIBC report, actually last year alone, by the federal government skilled worker program, only 3% of people who were admitted were labor construction workers. And in the next 4 years, you have 700,000 people leaving. So the numbers are just minor, and it's not even a dent. That's why we need a revamped system. That's why we are asking for something bold. But actually, the federal government just did it last month. For the caregiver pilot, they actually just disregarded the language proficiency, which actually everyone in the room knows how important speaking a language is. I personally speak 3. 2 of them are the Canadian official language. This is why it's not working. Not even in Nova Scotia. GTA are actually in the process of discussing something similar, but it needs a revamp. And if Canada wants to solve even a small part between the next 7 years, not even 3.87 million I'm talking about, even a percentage of it, it needs something radical, especially on the labor immigration, which Canadian history is built on immigration. So this is why we are proposing this. And I know it's a bit off topic for the Canadian way of doing things, But looking at Qatar, for example, as many small country hosting a World Cup with limited resources, and they've done it on a professional level, I think Canada, with its scale and a G7 country, could do something similar on a more enhanced way. So this is why.
Great presentation. Love this. Very interested in modular homes for quite a long time. So really interested. I have used the Lego example many times. But traditionally, there's just a fundamental thing that I'm challenged with. And that is, you started off talking about the reason why these other efforts have failed, right? Almost entirely regulatory problems, inconsistency, etc. If you're a bank or any other lender, I don't think the issue is so much collateral. Collateral is if the business fails, right? A bank is much more interested in a successful business, right? They're only going to worry about collateral if they're worried the business is not going to succeed. They'd much rather have a successful business. So I'm not actually convinced about all of the financing things that you're proposing, when the fundamental problem seems to be it's not demand, it's not, that the market wouldn't work if we had the regulatory openness to allow that to happen. And so to me, the bigger problem isn't financing problems, it's more why the regulatory system of Levittown, the challenge, huge success story. What was the fundamental problem? And I think that's the fundamental problem we have here. Now, my question is, how much of your weighting of this is really, like, if you're making the presentation to CMHC, the question, I think unfairly, is what the federal government can do. Because, and I hate to say it, but Section 91 trade and commerce, it ain't going to happen. It's already, the Supreme Court's already blown that one to bits. So that's not going to happen. So how would you weight this if you went down the path of all of this other stuff is really could go away if we could focus on the fundamental problem? It's not demand. The private sector, the market, if you can actually have the success, the labor will come, right? Like, some of it seems to be band-aids for a fundamental problem. So I guess, how would you approach that in terms of the fundamental problem? If I said you can't have this solved by the federal government, right? What would you do? Sorry, that was a probably really unfair question.
No, it's a messy topic. So.
There was a quote that was there was a quote we took from one of our classes, Professor McAdoo. It was Einstein's quote. He repurposed it and gave it to us, and we all looked at. We were in the same class. We all looked at each other when he said that. It said, "You cannot solve a problem at the same level where it was created." So this was the premise. We all looked at each other because we were like, "Yeah, that makes a lot of sense." Yes, it's important to have the provinces on board to do this. And we propose that the federal government works in collaboration with the provinces. But if we're saying we cannot solve it at the level of the federal government, we are looking at the provinces. And my 1 year in Canada, I've not been to Canada before my Max Bell experience. My 1 year in Canada has taught me one thing. It's one of the most federal states I've ever gone to or visit, and I've visited a lot of countries. This is one of the most federal states I've encountered. I don't see a possibility where the federal government not taking leadership of this, that it will work out. It might be so, but in the time we've spent doing this process, it's very important that the federal government takes leadership of driving this process. Why is that? I know you talk about Section 91, it was blown out. We met with, you probably know him, Eddie Goldenberg, one of the lawyers that designed the Constitution himself. And we were pitching it to him and saying, and then he was like, go for it, do it. And then we were like, yeah, this is the energy we needed. The reason why is that he said, The reason why we say this is that, yes, we are aiming for the skies. We're shooting and saying the federal government should do this. The federal government has to do something disruptive if this housing supply is supposed to be addressed. Yes, it may not sit well with a few provinces, but we are hoping that a few provinces, like New Brunswick mentioned, that they would like to even be a pilot for this project, if the National Building Code would be. We believe that it will set out a chain of events that will eventually lead to provinces coming on board. We had that about the childcare program, that when the federal government first introduced it, it was like, no, not the hell. Provinces were like, no. But Quebec was already doing it before then. But eventually, provinces got on board. We know it's not going to be an easy way to move ahead, but however, we believe that this is actually the way to go. I know for sure, I'm very interested in cases, so I know for sure that at least one province, I'm not going to mention name, will challenge it in court. We know the province, we're sitting there. So, so at the end of the day, we are counting on one province at least to take it to court. And we are quite positive that even if we don't land in the clouds, we will hit somewhere close by. So this is what we are hoping to do. Thank you.
And also to add on Mercy's, for the financial part, I actually was waiting for something like this. Modular currently stands on 1% of the construction sector in Canada. So it's an infant lie. I bet on all our kidneys and my kidney as well. No bank wants to lend something that is 1%. And by the way, we failed to mention, modular construction is 80% upfront cost. I personally am lender to my friends sometimes with their need and their friendship. I'm never going to give him 80% of what he needs upfront, and he's my friend. They're not running a business. You know what I mean? So this is looking at the numbers and looking at the current market. It's just an infant like. It's facing a lot of stigma. There's not enough labor, which, by the way, modular construction doesn't need a specific labor force because you are in an off-site construction and you are in a factory. But again, you just need someone to punch the buttons, unless AI comes in the next 10 years and then we're all sitting and watching. But this is how it's a two-phased. Yes, regulation is an issue, but yes, finance is an issue, and the current market itself is an issue. It's just no one wants to. And actually, based on our developer and many construction companies that we have actually interviewed, they said if modular is not 30 to 40% cheaper, no one is going to go for it because no one sees it in Canada. In Sweden, it's been there since the 1850s, almost 200 years ago. So this is a part of the issue. And Sweden is the home of IKEA. we cannot argue with that.
Okay, we've got 10 minutes left, so we can open it up to questions from the floor. So I've got John and John, and then Ian. Guadalupe. Oh, and Guadalupe. Okay.
They need a mic.
Yes, they do.
Hi. We've all been talking as though the only place we can get a modular home from is inside Canada. But a tried and very proven way to increase scale and reduce costs for any product in Canada is to integrate our market with our neighbor, the United States, if not with Mexico and Japan, and so on. This was discovered in the auto sector, and we did the Auto Pact in the 60s. And in the industry I've come from, it was done with small modular reactors, where Canadians know perfectly well how to build a reactor. But we've ended up buying from General Electric and Westinghouse, their designs anyway, because they have the depth to be there in 30 years when the thing needs work, because you want the company to be there in 30 years when the thing needs work. And they can drive the costs down. They can do the numbers. So did you look at opening up the Canadian market to other suppliers?
So actually, plot twist, Canada has two of the biggest modular factories in the world, and actually Canada exports to the US, and exports to Saudi Arabia, and exports to France, and exports to 120 other countries. So actually, having a 1% presentation in the Canadian market where you are actually a leader and opening up your borders for an infant-like industry, because Shagan is looking at me, he's having an economist proud moment. You will kill that infant industry, while on a small part you're actually a leader in factorization and you're on bigger scales. And actually GTA and Toronto started funding a company called Beck for multi-million-dollar projects because they just see the potential and they just see Canada to become a G7 and becoming actually more than a G7, becoming a leader in an industry that is very specific and very high tech. So why would I open my doors? Like we have a saying internally, is like my mom is making cookies at home. and my neighbors are eating it, but I'm sending them off. Why am I not eating them at home? So this is the same idea. Why would I just go buy from my neighbors and I can just produce them as good, if even better quality, lower cost, and I can actually export it and get that nice exchange rates in between, right? So this is my answer to you.
Hey there, great job. Very compelling idea, and I see all of the economic and business advantages that you've described. This may be colored by the fact I've been dealing with municipalities in terms of building permits. But I'd like to take that thought and bring it back to your overall purpose. Your overall purpose was more houses, more quickly. And I'm wondering if the residual zoning and, municipal rules would actually allow it to be successful. If you look at your timeline, I'm assuming everything leading, site planning, environmental approval, all those things stay the same, whether it's a manufactured home or stick built. So it's the savings are in the building of the house, but are they potentially all lost or significantly reduced because municipalities are going to go, no, that's not the right footprint, or no, I don't want that kind of house in this neighborhood, and the time. Yeah, anyway, you get my drift.
I'll start. We're not going to boil the ocean. We're trying to boil Lake Superior. We're not going to solve land use. We're not going to solve every part of the housing issue, although we recognize there is absolutely a need for all levels of government to be involved. Part of what we've discovered is we need to get municipal building officials to become more familiar themselves with modular, so they understand the nuances and how production differs from stick build. Municipalities are absolutely a part of this. We've run into the challenges that the federal government has when they look to work directly with municipalities and cut out the provinces. There's also the challenge of provinces who may be willing to be told what to do if there's money attached, but don't want to be told how to do it. So intergovernmental is absolutely a huge part of it. Our focus is on factories to build those houses and then look for leadership to follow at other levels of government to solve the parts that they own. If anyone else wants to chime in.
Wonderful presentation, you guys. I really enjoyed it. And anyone who can pull off some laughs in the midst of all of this is, you amazing, really. So when this all gets approved by the federal government, I'm curious how much time you guys spent talking about the reputational challenges of the concept we have around modular construction and how you think that you would manage that.
So we think the proof is in the pudding. We think part of the strategy is to demonstrate, and we were pleased to see a bit of that in the federal budget. I'll share too that we developed key insights and began formulating options and recommendations in March, as you will know, and then the federal budget dropped on April 16th and really shifted our world because there was a whole bunch of programmatic involvement there, new projects, new programs, billions of dollars in spending. But we were buoyed to see there were some demonstration projects, and we think that that's an important part of that shift in misunderstanding and stigma is the proof is in the pudding. Don't tell us, show us. And again, that's true for buyers, and we saw that with size and quality, but it's also true for lenders, and it's true truly throughout the sector. Like, this is an industrial policy shift is a huge undertaking and involves virtually every part of the sector and then some. So a lot of work to do there on just the conceptual shift.
Great presentation, folks. One comment, one question.
Hi, you guys. Hi.
Mercy, we may be in need of a new prime minister soon, and I just want to suggest that you encourage yourself to consider a life in politics. I don't know whether we would be smart enough to elect you, but it would be a joy to watch you on the campaign trail.
Hear, hear. Hear, hear.
My question. So I share some of Martha's skepticism, I suppose, about the need for capital, especially for big firms. Right? So a lot of houses are built with 5-person construction firms, and they are probably not going to build a facility for modular homes, and they would desperately need capital, and there would be capital market imperfections that would prevent them. But we've got a lot of houses in this country that are built from big firms. There are firms that build thousands of houses a year, and in many provinces, which means they are building to a more or less common set of codes, and they're building hundreds, if not thousands, of houses a year. So, and they've got deep pockets, so they don't need financial capital, and they're not currently building modular homes. So my question is, why aren't they? Because there are clearly benefits from doing it. They have the ability to do it, so why aren't they doing it?
Thank you, Chris, for the question.
And then Pearl's got a question, or you're going to answer my question? So, first of all, she started by agreeing with me, okay, which is not a Pearl-like thing to do, okay? Just want that to go on the record, okay? You should say it in the microphone. So all hear it.
This is Chris's going away present. So I just want to pick up on that point. Louis Gaudreau and his team at UQAM came out yesterday with a major report on precisely that point, that most of the money and most of the building is happening in sort of traditional market sectors where you have kind of middle class condominiums, higher end single housing being built. So their conclusion was that the deficits are actually around multi-purpose rental units, social housing, and so on. That's where the gap is in the market. It's not in people who can afford $2 million condominiums. That's fine. And to Chris's point, that capital's actually there. So my question to you, and I realize you're on one foot on this one a little bit, or maybe not, is building on what Chris said. How do you think that your proposal can address what appears to be those major gaps in the Canadian housing market? Thank you very much.
Thank you for the questions. What we understand and what we know is, yes, we agree, these organizations and these firms have built all of these houses and they have deep pockets, but what is missing is the timeline. Because the federal government has set a very ambitious goal of having 3.87 million homes, we believe that having the traditional construction methods might not produce these homes at the time by 2031 like the federal government wants it to be. That is why we have the modular offsite construction mechanisms and methodologies in place. And to answer Professor Eladis's question, we understand and agree, yes, we have these housing gaps, and yes, with more and more financial situation and strains that we have here, there might be a scope, or there might be a possibility of more people requiring these social housings. And because we need them fast to meet the challenges, modular could also be an answer, and it has been an answer. In fact, one of the biggest reasons why people have negative perception towards offsite modular homes is because they're built for social housing to make it build faster. So we want to come here and say, it does not matter why the houses are being built, whether it's to house those who are economically at a disadvantaged position, or it is for Antonio Banderas. We are saying the world is the oyster when it comes to offsite construction, and that's why we believe in that, and that's why we are here building innovation in Canada. It's time for us to really buckle up. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, folks. Terrific job. Terrific job. Okay, we are going to continue the theme with housing at 11 o'clock sharp. So we've got a half-hour break. See you back at 11.